Hello, I'm Los Angeles County Board of Supervisor Hilda Solis, and I want to thank First Partner Newsom for providing an important platform to observe Latina Equal Pay. Women hold nearly half of today's jobs, and their earnings account for a significant portion of the household income that sustains their families. Yet equal pay for equal work, as you know, remains elusive for millions of working women. The National Women's Law Center has calculated that Latinas are paid only 54 cents for every dollar paid to men. That translates into an annual median loss of over $28,000 for Latinas. And here in Los Angeles, the wage gap is even more severe. According to the Economic Status of Latinas report, in the Los Angeles metro region, Latinos only earn 37.5 cents for every dollar made by white, non-Hispanic men. What's even more troubling is that wage gap has grown. This inequity contributes directly to women's poverty and impacts their family for decades to come. Latinas experience this pay gap despite the fact that they are increasingly a critical foundation of our economy. And in California, the number of Latina-owned businesses, as you know, has increased 111% since 2007. But structural racism is driving the wage gap, and it's important to name it as such. There are studies demonstrating that the wage gap is attributed to, however, the Center for American Progress found that more than 40% of the gender wage gap is unexplained. And frankly, that is part of the reason why we have the wage gap. The full reason for it is unaddressed, and that means people can't get away with it. It's because of forums like this that we can call out the problem for what it is and tackle it head on. And here in California, we've increased, as you know, the minimum wage, but that needs to happen at the federal level. We need to ensure representation of Latino women on corporate boards nationwide, and Senator Hannah Beth Jackson's bill provides a model for that. And here in Los Angeles County, I increased the county small business utilization goal to 25%, which includes awarding contracts to women-owned and minority-owned businesses. Last year, that resulted in awarding contracts amounting to $201 million and $210 million total, respectively. In short, there are many ways to help those in the Latinx community to bring about change, and showing up is a big part of it. It's hard to overstate the problem. The COVID-19 pandemic has only added to the disparities, including the wage gap. And here in LA County, Latinos were 4 times as likely as whites to be COVID-19 positive in late July. Latino residents are twice as likely to die of COVID in LA County. Our lives and our livelihood are at stake. And we have come so far over the years in addressing these inequalities, but COVID-19 has exposed and exacerbated those disparities. Let's use this time to accelerate change for the better for all of us. Let's not lose sight of the disparities and instead work to address them collectively, because we all will be better off now and in the future. Thank you so much.
So hi everyone, and welcome to our Latina Equal Pay Day discussion. Thank you to Supervisor Hilda Solis for that wonderful introduction and for the Commission's partnership on this very important work. And thank you also to LaKenya Jordan, the Executive Director of the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. Now, as the first partner of California, I'm honored to be joined here today by 3 remarkably inspiring leaders: Assemblymember Eloise Gómez Reyes, Moníca Ramírez, founder and president of Justice for Migrant Women and co-founder of Se Puede, as well as Jessica Rodriguez, president of entertainment and chief marketing officer at Univision. Today, we're here to have a conversation focused on active allyship, advocacy, and structural change to build true equity for Latina women in California as we navigate inequality, the COVID-19 crisis, and beyond. Last year, we launched Equal Pay CA in partnership with the Commission to turn the strongest pay laws in the nation into the smallest pay gap in the nation. And through a combination of education, implementation, and enforcement, we are making sure that every woman in California gets her due. And since Equal Pay California's launch in April 2019, Monica actually joined us for the launch. Thank you, Monica. We've connected thousands of Californians to our educational equal pay resources. We've hosted roundtables and conversations to hear firsthand about the pay gaps impact on working women and their families, and we've secured more than 50 major corporate commitments to our Equal Pay Pledge, reaching hundreds of thousands of employees. And so I think we can all agree that there's never been a more important time to continue our push for gender equity for Latinx women, especially making our voices heard. So I'm thankful to all of you who are joining us today, and I can't wait to hear from these amazing women that I get to share the virtual stage with. So let's get right to it. Assemblymember and Commissioner Eloise Gómez Reyes was elected to the California State Assembly in November 2016 to represent California's 47th Assembly District. Eloise, a proud daughter of immigrants, has been a champion for her community throughout her career. Assemblymember Gómez Reyes has supported and helped to pass several pieces of legislation advancing and strengthening women's equality, equal pay, human rights, and the overall quality of life for women and girls in California. Jessica Rodriguez's laser-focused career aspirations, combined with her mantra, "You have to make the magic happen," I love that, launched her rise to CMO and President of Entertainment for Univision, America's Hispanic super brand. An admired and respected leader throughout the media industry, her passion, creativity, and collaborative style, yay to that, have helped to solidify Univision's position as the leading Hispanic media company in the United States. And Moníca Ramírez is the daughter and granddaughter of migrant farm workers. She's also an attorney, an author, and an activist. She founded Justice for Migrant Women, a national organization that seeks to advance the human and civil rights of migrant women workers. She's also co-founder of Alianza Nacional de Campesinas, the Latinx House, Sisters Rising, and Se Puede, among other initiatives. And she serves on the board of the National Women's Law Center and is a member of the Time's Up Global Leadership Board. So welcome, and thanks to all of you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be with all inspiring women on a day like today.
Yes, oh, that's right. Well, let's take that forward. Each of you is so accomplished in your career. And so I want to know, for all of the women, the young women in particular who are watching, what was your first job and how did you get into your current field?
First, I want to thank the Office of the First Partner for this invitation to today's panel. Thank you so much for putting us all together. It's an honor to be here in recognition of Latina Equal Pay Day. For those of you who don't know me, not only am I the Assembly member, but I'm also on the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls. This district that I represent, I absolutely love. It's in the heart of San Bernardino. Well, I am the proud daughter of immigrants. I was raised in the Inland Empire, and as a young girl, my first job was picking onions and grapes. I love picking onions, and red onions still to this day are my absolute favorite. And we picked onions so that we could afford to buy new clothes come September. My experience growing up taught me the power, though, of civic engagement and learning from other people and speaking to other people, and eventually got me to the point where I wanted to become that voice for the voiceless. Now, after high school, I had a scholarship to attend USC, but my father, being that very traditional Mexican father, said I couldn't go away to college. So I went to my community college, and I'm very glad I did. I did that for 2 years. I then transferred to USC, got my Bachelor of Science, moved on to Loyola Law School, and earned my Juris Doctorate. After I finished my schooling, I returned to my roots and became the first Latina to open up a law firm in the Inland Empire. I practiced law for many years. And during this time, I worked alongside my community to make sure that their voices were heard, especially our Latinas. I saw how much our communities needed that representation, and that's what eventually led me to run for office. Since coming to the Assembly in 2016, as the first partner mentioned, I've worked hard to advance the rights and the well-being of women in our state. And I'm excited to be here among such accomplished women to discuss Latina Equal Pay and how we can achieve it here in California. So again, thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank you, Assemblymember. Moníca?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation and for all of your leadership, First Partner Newsom.
I was at the launch, and I'm so happy to hear about all the progress that's been made. And we know that there's more work to be done, but certainly I'm proud of what's been happening over the past year since the launch of the program. My first job was as a writer for an area newspaper. It was sort of an accidental gig that I got. Because I come from a migrant farm worker family that settled out of the migrant stream in Ohio. My parents had raised us to know about the farm worker community and some of the struggle. And so when I was 14 years old, I realized that there was this welcome back fisherman section of the newspaper, but there wasn't a welcome back farm worker section of the newspaper. And farm workers and fishermen come back to my town at the same time every year. So anyway, as a fearless 14-year-old, I hopped on my bicycle and I rode down to the newspaper and I asked why not. And they gave me my newspaper beat as a writer. And so I started writing stories about farm workers and Latinx community members in my town. And, fast forward to where I am now, as an attorney, as someone who's still writing, and as someone who's been really focused on my career on telling the stories of community members that aren't always heard from and aren't always seen. I really do think that first job sort of created the foundation for much of the work that I've done. I really believe that if we don't share our stories, then not only are we erased, and not only will people sort of make up stories for us, but I think that if we don't tell our authentic stories, that also is a real loss of opportunity for the rest of our community and country to grow. So that's been the work that I've been doing, and have been really honored to get to tell some very fascinating and important stories over the years.
Thanks, Monica. Jessica?
So again, I echo the sentiment. Thank you, First Partner Newsom, for gathering us together and speaking on such an important topic. Look, I like to say my first informal job, I think many of us probably have had that first informal job of, I like to say I was a translator at a very early age to my parents. My parents, like millions of other Latinas, were immigrants in this country, and they spoke Spanish. And as that first generation Latina growing up, I was kind of that bridge between two communities. So I was the translator at the bank and at the supermarket and in parent-teacher conferences. And I think there's something about what that does to you as a child in terms of being a leader and putting yourself out there, right? That I feel that that's something that always inspired me. And I think actually that's where the roots of my passion for Univision and Spanish language television came about, because I realized that, this was a brand that was championing for the rights of Latinos in this country. And, it was experiencing that with my parents at an early age. I was like, I really love this brand. Somehow, as I grew up, I saw a disconnect between the fact that, again, being the person floating through two cultures, American culture and Latino culture, I was growing up watching Melrose Place and Beverly Hills, 90210, and all the shows that you wanted to see when you were a teenager to fit in. But yet my home life was about Spanish language news and sports and novellas and, gathering generations together, watching TV, and a little bit of that disconnect of like, why aren't we being represented? Mm-hmm. Why is what I'm living in a day-to-day not apparent to the broader culture? And that was where my passion for television came about. As many people can imagine is, again, that first generation, first to graduate from, high school, college, get my master's, all that. I didn't know how to break into television. And I think, for a lot of people thinking about how do you break in because you don't have access, you don't have power, you don't have mentorship, you don't have sponsorship, you don't know where to begin, oftentimes you can feel dejected. And so I'd like to say that, my life is surrounded by angels who along the way saw something special in me, that supported me and inspired me to really go after my dreams. And so that's what I definitely want everybody to come across and understand, right? That the dream and desire that you have for yourself, don't let anybody take that away from you, and surround yourself in that allyship of people that will help you to find the job that you want, to negotiate the salary that you want, to be able to navigate a culture that's unknown to you.
That's great. Thanks, guys. So Assemblymember Reyes, you've done so much on the issue of equal pay and specifically Latinas equal pay. And in California, sadly, Latina unequal pay is actually more than 10 cents lower than the national average. And I have a hard time with that. From your perspective, what is driving this wage gap, both nationally, but especially in California?
The roots are so deep, and without a doubt, it has to do with racism, with discrimination. Throughout my life, I've witnessed how the wage gap has affected women in California, especially our Latinas. This gap between the women and the men is evident even in our state assembly. I wanted to share that since 1849, there have been 3,773 assembly members elected to office. Only 157 of those have been women. That's a total of 4% of all of them. And our API and African-American women were elected to the state legislature for the first time in 1966, but it wasn't until 1982 that we had our first Latina elected to the California state legislature. I know we're making progress. There's no doubt in my mind, but there's a lot we still have to do. Last year, the California Legislative Women's Caucus reached a historic high of 38 members. Of the 38, 16 are Latinas. And in fact, the Latino caucus, we kind of joke with the man that it should be the Latina caucus because we beat them by one.
That's right.
Yes, and I love that. This gender gap shows just how much more our state and our nation has to do to ensure the equal participation of women in our economy. And it's the widest for women of color. And we all know that. We see the statistics. Nationally, and first partner, I'm glad you mentioned, Jennifer, that it's worse in California. That was hard for me to believe. But nationally, for every dollar paid to a white non-Hispanic man, a Black woman is typically earning just 63 cents of that. Native American woman, 60 cents, and Latinas, 55 cents. This is on a national level. And as you said, it's 10 cents worse here in California. That disparity in California is worse, and it's hard to believe. The median earning for Latinas working full-time year-round is just 39 cents. 39 cents for every dollar earned by white men. I had my staff look into some of this, and we find that this gap, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's driven by gender bias, racial discrimination, job segregation, workplace harassment. It also stems from a lack of workplace policies that support family caregiving, which is still mostly performed by women. Since I came into office in 2016, I've tried to work really hard to advance women's rights here in California. In 2017, I authored AB 2757, which increased the fee charged by co-reporters on documents they produced. Seems like such an insignificant kind of thing. But this fee had not been raised in 27 years. And the increase brought wage parity to a profession that is, you guessed it, 97% female. Last year, I authored AB 9, and I was joined on a bipartisan basis by Assembly Members Friedman and Waldron. This bill will give women more time to seek justice in employment discrimination claims by extending timelines to file a complaint. It was 1 year, it's now 3 years. This year, I'm going to continue to fight for policies that support women. This includes equitable access to child care, health insurance. Without a doubt, our working mothers and communities of color need the most in light of this pandemic. Something that has struck me also as being part of the Committee on Aging and Care, we find that the less a woman earns over the course of her lifetime, the less her retirement's going to be. So we have to address these issues. There's an inherent bias against women and Latinas. I mean, we know that. It's preventing many of them from achieving a stable retirement in those later years also. So there's so much that's causing this, but in the end, we're all losing out.
We are. You're right about that. We're going to get into some more of the weeds and the details that you just discussed in a later question. I'm going to jump to you, Monica. Thank you, Assembly Member. That was really great information. Monica is a vocal advocate for the Latinx community, working specifically on representation and being the voice of so many immigrant women. How does the struggle for equal pay differ for immigrant women versus US-born Latinas?
Yes, thank you. So it's really difficult to know exactly how wide the pay gap is for immigrant Latina workers. And that is because, as you mentioned at the beginning, the pay gap is calculated based on full-time employment over the course of a year. And there are many immigrant women workers who are not working in full-time positions. So those who are working part-time or those who are maybe being paid in cash. And for farm worker women, the community that I come from and the Assemblywoman comes from, oftentimes farm worker women are paid on the same paychecks as their male family members. So there are a lot of reasons that we don't actually have data on all of the workers, women workers, to know the gap for some. And in particular for immigrant women who are undocumented, that is certainly the case. But what we do know based on the data that we have is that it can be as wide as 37 cents to the dollar. And that's less than the average for Latinas in California. That's certainly less than the national average. And I think that what we know is that oftentimes it is because status as immigrant women workers that employers feel as though they can get away with paying these women workers less. And so that is definitely what we are seeing for workers in California and certainly other parts of the country.
Thanks. Jessica, so the California Partners Project was an organization I co-founded to support the work we're doing out of the First Partners Office. And we recently put out a report about women on corporate boards, on public corporate boards. And while the representation of women on public boards is increasing in our state, we know that Latinx women are woefully underrepresented. Yet we all know that major decisions that impact our communities, our economy, our broader society are made in the corporate boardroom. As the Chief Marketing Officer and President of Entertainment for Univision, what role do you see corporate leaders playing in closing the wage gap for Latinas broadly? And then have you come across pay equity issues personally as you climbed the corporate ladder or been elevated, climbed sort of, I'm not sure, it feels a little disparaging, even though we are climbing, aren't we? And how do we increase Latina representation in upper management and on corporate boards? I know that's a threefold question. But
Look, I think there's a lot to unpack there. What I like to kind of look at things from a perspective of three buckets. Mm-hmm. And the first one, right, and the three are access first, then mentorship, and then sponsorship, right? And so I want to talk about that from a, corporate perspective, right? I want to, I can't overemphasize the importance of that first step, access, because it's through that first opportunity, getting through the front door. And so what does access look like? Access looks like, internship programs, development, training. It's actually, sponsoring media centers. For example, that's something actually that Univision does. We actually went to junior high schools in 6 major cities and sponsored a media center so that people could actually say, hey, maybe I do want to grow up and work in media, right? And so, the reason why access is so important, specifically when it comes to women, is because, it's that first job, and I think we can all agree that it's that first job that you get that really sets the tone of your future earning power, right? And so it's really hard to catch up if you start off kind of at a place of not knowing. And so, the other thing that I want to call attention to is that, and I bring about my own experience here, is that, when you're the first in your family, and as a Latina, so many times we're first, right? When you're the first, there's an incredible burden and stress of you wanting to make sure that you don't fail your family, that you don't fail the people that have given everything to you, right? And so in that desire to have that tunnel vision of just making your family proud and your community proud, you think that certain things aren't important to your growth and development. So I was the first person to say, oh, I don't need to go to that job fair, or maybe I don't need to go to that training, or I can't do that because I have to come home and I have to help with the homework and the housework and you know, all these other things that in particular, I think, you know, Latina women, you know, based on who we are culturally, we say that's important, right? Our family, our faith, everything else. I'm carrying everyone else's burden so that I can't look to kind of, you know, make my career goals happen, right? So I think from that first perspective, we have to make sure that the access is there. The second one is mentorship. And so once you're in the door, it's like, what are the systems as an organization that you have in place to mentor people? And this is like tremendous white space, because it's everything from, you know, does your organization, does your company have affinity groups, right? So for example, at Univision, we have a women's leadership council, right? Where women can gather together and they can talk about things, everything related to negotiation skills, to networking skills, because there is a language and there is a way about how corporate America works. And that again, if you don't have the inside track to that, if you don't know that networking is important, talking to your colleague, discussing things that, you know, are taboo, like how much do you make? Those are things that will actually allow us to grow our voices and be able to ask for more as we choose to grow. And then the third one is sponsorship. And this is where, you know, this is where we actually then get into the issues of how do we make sure that there's senior management, upper management, diversity, that women are represented at the most senior levels of companies and boards. And so what I like to say is that the difference between mentorship and sponsorship is sponsorship, you actually, as a senior leader, you're actually putting skin in the game. And you're actually saying, there is a talented person in my organization. And because we're talking about, you know, Latina women, it's like, how are we looking at that junior level, that middle level employee who we see can be a bright star, have a bright future at this company, and say, I'm going to sponsor your growth. And the way that you sponsor someone is by giving them important projects. It goes beyond the coffee, and it goes beyond the, let me have a 30-minute chat with you weekly. It's, how do I bring you along with me to the room where it happens? How do we make sure that, you know, I'm giving you a high-level project so that everybody in the organization can say, oh, this person is a star, right? Because we also know that women and Latina women, it's hard for us to raise our hand. It's hard for us. You know, we expect that, you know, good work should be looked at and seen. And that's why I say sometimes you got to make the magic happen. You have to raise your hand. But if every woman, if every senior person who is leading an organization can say, I'm going to make it my business to make sure to bring forward that next generation and really sponsor them, then that's where you start seeing, right, that board diversity, that corporate diversity begin to happen, and at a much faster pace than it is now.
That's great. And can I just ask, did you ever yourself struggle with advocating for yourself or advocating for equal pay?
You know, look, I think for sure, I'd be hard pressed to find any woman, any Latina woman in general, who doesn't have a hard time advocating for herself, right? By the way, you know, interesting enough, I just read this the other day and it made so much sense. You know, in general, women, right, and in particular, you know, Latina women, you know, we tend to always be about uplifting our teams.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've seen it a bunch of times. Instead of you saying like, oh, I accomplished this and I got this done and these were my results, I find that by and large, women, we're always speaking about our team. Oh, our team got this done. And, you know, we want to bring the team along with us. And so it's really hard because the Latina experience, the Latino experience is about collectivism. It's about we're better together. It's about culture. I mean, this is the foundation of our values as Latinos. So then all of a sudden to expect a Latina to say, let me switch that hat and all of a sudden be about advocating for myself, that's really hard. And again, that's why I think so much time, you know, oftentimes, look, I think from a governmental perspective to private sector, you know, there's a lot of important big work that needs to be done, but everybody has the power and the influence to affect change, even at the littlest levels. Like, be an advocate to somebody. Tell them what a great job, ask the person sitting next to you and tell them, you did a great job on that project. You go and raise your hand and you toot your own horn. Like, let's be allies to each other. Those simple things can unlock so much potential.
Well, and I also feel like it's one of the reasons it'd be so great to have more Latina women on corporate boards, because they can bring those values of the collective, of our shared responsibility towards each other to the tables of power, which seems to be missing at times in this rugged, individualistic, win at all costs capitalist mentality that we have in America. Okay, so Univision's an incredible force for sharing Latinx stories across America, and you all spoke a bit about why it's so important to elevate the stories of the Latinx community. I'm curious if each of you want to, expand further on that question of the importance of Latinx stories, Latina women's stories, Latina moms' stories, and also how might increasing representations of Latinx women in the media contribute to closing the wage gap overall?
So, this is an issue that I'm very passionate about, and in particular through the work that we've been doing through the Latinx House. We really focus on the mission of telling Latinx stories because there are many reasons. First of all, we're not a monolith. Right? There's a perception of who our community is, and often that perception is incorrect. We don't all come from Mexico. We don't all speak Spanish. We don't all, have the same immigration history or story. And while all of those things are good, being from Mexico, speaking Spanish, all those things are good. The truth is, in our community, we're 60 million people strong, and we have varied histories, and we're proud of that. That's what makes our community so special, is all the diversity that exists within it. But the thing is that many of the stories that have been told about our community have not been ones that delve into the complexity of our community. And what we've seen, particularly in the last few years, but I would suggest maybe over time as well, is that when people create these false narratives about a community like ours, it results in discrimination. It results in physical violence. It results in the rising number of hate crimes. And so we have to tell our stories so that we can explain to people who we are as a community, as a whole community, and why our uniqueness is so important. And we also have to tell our stories, because I think that is how we will deal with some of the implicit bias that exists, right? I mean, the reason that Latinas are paid less is because we are valued less. Our work is valued less. The perception of what we can do and what we can bring is not in line with what we actually bring and what we actually contribute. And so telling the full story about who we are as people and all that we offer is critically important to challenging the false notions that people have, and those false notions which often set things like our pay and the possibility for raises and the possibility for advancement. So I think there are many, many reasons that we need to make sure that we're telling the stories of our community and Latinas in particular. But in particular, I think that specifically related to the pay gap, one of the biggest hurdles that we have to address when thinking about pay equality is the bias that exists, and how are we going to make sure that managers and supervisors and hiring individuals are checking their biases, and that will happen if they can have a fuller understanding of who we are as people and as a community.
Powerful, thank you. Assemblymember or Jessica?
If I'm ever in the room, I want to be with Jessica and Monica.
I know, right? All of you, amazing.
This is absolutely amazing. I mean, Monica's right. It's the stories. It's our stories. And we may see these as insignificant stories. This is how we grew up. But these are stories that need to be told. And Univision holds a position in the Latino community like no other. The reach of Univision is, I'm sure they've measured it, but I would say it's immeasurable. The power that Univision has to tell the story and to bring people together, to elevate people, I think that it's something that I'm sure they recognize, and I want to emphasize that. I think one of the problems that I see just in general in media is that oftentimes, like Monica was saying, the Latinas are portrayed as subservient. Usually we're lower ranking. Then you have the powerful, but the powerful are not the Latinas. I think how we are portrayed by Univision, by the media, has a lot to do with where we see our position, where our young women see their position in society. We need to show in the media and everywhere that Latinas belong everywhere, whether it's in the boardroom, the laboratories, the corporate offices, or the legislature, any leadership position. I think showing them in those leadership positions is extremely important. I think that if we continue to do this, eventually our young women, our young girls are going to see themselves as capable of attaining all of those positions in their own lives. There's just so much more that needs to be done, but I do know that Univision plays a large role in how our young girls are going to see themselves in the future. These disparities are unacceptable, and I think working towards something better, I think is going to be, is something that I look forward to. When I've seen Univision with their novelas, and I grew up watching the novelas with my mother and with my sisters, and they have so much to offer, and I'm looking forward to always seeing the women in those leadership roles.
Well, there's definitely that concept, if you can see it, you can be it, right? And that's the wonderful role that Univision plays. So Jessica, any further comments on this?
You know, what I would say, first of all, thank you. Those very kind words. I will say that, you know, there's a duty and a responsibility to make sure that we continue to behold our mission, right? And that media in general, right? Mainstream media, you know, English language media, et cetera, that we're all doing our part, right? And that we're all being held to the highest of standards. You know, I think you're absolutely right. You know, you can't be what you can't see. And so I think it's important to show the diversity of voices, the diversity in color, right? You know, the fact that, you know, I think we've highlighted particularly this year, right? The need to ensure that we're elevating our Black voices as well, right? And, you know, even, you know, whether it's, you know, we want more young Latinas to go into STEM careers, right? And so how are we making sure that, you know, that's reflected on our air through partnerships, right? I think those are just examples of how, you know, we continue to build to the future. You know, I know that in California, we've partnered in our local, in our biggest local market, Channel 34, Posible events. And Posible, what's so fabulous about Posible is that, you know, it's taking this insight that, you know, Latina women are opening small businesses at a faster rate than anyone else. How do we support them? How do we help them? Not only with access to services, right, and how to get financing and all the things that you know, other corporations will take for granted, right? But that's invaluable insight for that small business operator. But also, you know, how do we teach them things about presenting a business plan, right? What's a marketing campaign, right? So I think it goes back to what the greater role of media companies can be, right? And it's not just about entertaining, but it should equally be about informing and empowering and elevating our Hispanic community, our Hispanic women into the future, right? Because the future is, you know, we're in a majority minority right now.
Yeah, we are.
And, you know, women are the future, and Latina women are the ones that make the decisions in the household. And so all of those things have to coalesce into that North Star of ensuring that we're elevating our Latina women.
You've just given me something, a seed I just want to plant with you is just, and I don't know how much you're doing at Univision around this, but really deconstructing masculinities and encouraging or inspiring men to see women as their equals, their partners, their allies, but men playing a larger role in lifting up women and playing a larger role in care and caregiving so that women can have these careers, but sort of normalizing equality for men.
What I will say there is that, you know, oftentimes when you're the first in the room or the only in the room, right? The only Latina in the room, I want to overemphasize, because I think this sometimes gets lost. You know, if I'm the first woman in the room, fact is that most of the opportunities that I've gotten and where I've been able to actually get at Univision has been, you know, obviously through hard work, but that I've been recognized by my male bosses. Yeah. And so, you know, like so for all the men that are watching this, right, like I just want them to, you know, I'm going to give them a shout out and kudos and keep doing what you're doing and help us and take us along and continue to do the good work, because, you know, I'm standing here because so many, when I spoke about angels in the beginning, right, many of those angels were men.
Let's make a comment on this, on the statement of men's role, because I think it's really important as we think about what's happening with Latina workers right now in the COVID crisis. We know that the recent jobs report showed that 324,000 Latinas exited the workforce in August and September, more than any other worker or group of workers in our country. And this point about making sure that we are supporting Latina workers and that male family members are supporting Latina workers is really critical. And it's going to be so important when we talk about getting Latinas back to work, because so many Latinas have left the workplace because they're taking care of children and sick family members, et cetera. And I feel like, you know, as we talk about Latina Equal Pay and this day that we're observing, we need everyone to understand that this is not a woman's issue only. It is not a Latina woman's issue only. It has to be all of our issue. And it certainly has to be an issue for our male family members to advocate on our behalf as well, because when we are not paid fairly and when Latinas are paid half or less than half than their white male counterparts, that affects our entire family. That affects generations of our family. So I just want to put a fine point on that, because I feel like in this moment with the COVID crisis, there are even more challenges for Latina workers and thinking about what it looks like to help Latinas get back to work.
Yes, thank you. Well, that's an excellent pivot into COVID-19 and the fact that it's shown us that the jobs that are typically devalued and underpaid are in fact essential, that nurses, childcare workers, grocery store clerks, these are the jobs that keep our society going, and that women, especially Latinas, fulfill this key piece in our economy. And they're often, at least half the time, the breadwinners for their families. Why do you think we have such a hard time valuing these workers? And what can we do to fix it? On top of how can we challenge, right, this concept that the woman, especially during COVID-19, that the woman has to quit her job and the man can continue to work because the woman has to stay home with the kids. Give me your thoughts on all of that.
Really important question. We're living through this, and I will tell you that my staff is spending so much time talking to many of these women who have lost their jobs because of COVID. We know that our essential workers at this point are the lifeline, especially during this pandemic. It goes without saying that they're risking their lives and the lives of their loved ones. And it's in our fields, in our hospitals, in our grocery stores, restaurants, and so many other businesses in the state that are those essential jobs, those essential industries. And we've seen the statistics that COVID has disproportionately affected our communities of color. And unfortunately, those communities of color are in the workforce make up the majority of our state's low-wage workers. On a personal note, I will tell you that I authored AB 685 and our wonderful governor signed it into law in September that will protect our workers, California workers. It'll require that employers notify any employee when they've been exposed to somebody who has COVID-19 at the work site. One of the things that we found is that our workers were not being told, and we know this happened a lot in the fields. So if you're not told that you've been exposed, you can't make a decision about yourself and your loved ones and the public. And I think that because they are the ones that are in these fields, that's another reason why they've been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19. There's so much more that goes with this, but those are just my initial thoughts.
Great. Jessica?
You know, I think what this is going to require, this moment in time through COVID and this disproportionate impact of Latina women and what it means for the future of work, all of this needs to kind of be reimagined. And look, you know, I think the one thing that I will say is that I think that there has been many stories and many more to come that will continue to speak out on what's happening, right? The fact that until about 9 months ago, you know, whether you were a nurse or a teacher, we undervalued those roles. And I think that now that everyone has become a homeschooler, right? All of a sudden, I think there's an appreciation there, right? So I think that's the first thing, that we just have to continue to acknowledge and show these stories, because it's reality. We're confronting with the reality that maybe we didn't want to confront, about just kind of how we were valuing certain sectors of our economy. But, you know, in terms of specifically in corporate America, I think it's going to require a lot of reflection and a lot of just work and ideation around what it means to go into an office, right? I think, you know, COVID has leapfrogged us on so many levels into the future that we weren't ready for. So I think that if we want to talk about supporting, you know, how do we continue to support women, maybe addressing what Monica has said, which is absolutely true, that, you know, women are leaving the workforce in droves, right? Because they're the primary caretaker at home and they just can't do it all. I think if we set up some systems in corporate America, whether it's flex time, it's, you know, this rigid idea of coming into the office Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, right? You know, this isn't working for families anymore, right? And so I think we've proven that you can have incredible operational excellence even when people are working from home. And so how do we recreate the rules of work so that we achieve what we need to achieve for the business and what the business goals are, so that everybody can, you know, grow in their careers and support their families, et cetera, but also how are we no longer ignoring the fact that women have to come to work with the entirety of themselves. And that means, you know, particularly for Latina women, it's I'm caring for my children and I'm probably caring for my parents. I have an extended family in the home. So maybe I may not be in a high risk group, but, you know, my mother, who I'm caring for and lives in the home with me, she's a high risk group. So what does that mean? So I just think it's a whole reevaluation. It's an exciting time to think about what it means for the future of work.
Great. No, I agree. Totally. Thank you. Monica, any final comments on that? I mean, you're clearly in this work, in the center of it.
Yeah, I think that in order for things to change, there are two things that have to happen. One, culture has to be changed, and we're seeing it's being changed before our eyes when it comes to that, seeing these workers and the importance of their jobs, and then changing culture so that those jobs are valued, which is some of what Jessica was speaking to. But the other thing, and I always say California leads in this way, is that we need culture to shift and we need policy to shift. And California has been a leader on the policy when it comes to some of these frontline workers and jobs. But the reality is, for many parts of the country, particularly when you're just even looking at federal law, many of these frontline workers have been excluded from some of the most basic protections. You know, farm workers have been excluded from some of the most basic protections for over 80 years. And so if our political leadership does not show how it values these frontline workers by actually changing the law to make meaningful change for them in their lives, then that sends a message to the rest of society that we also don't have to value these workers in their lives. And so, you know, we've been very deep in the COVID response work since the pandemic started, trying to get, you know, funds and PPE and food and all sorts of things to the community. And, you know, these are temporary solutions to a problem that has been built upon a much longer standing problem, which has been the exclusion of workers from these basic rights. And so if we're going to move forward after this COVID crisis, we have to understand that the exclusion of these workers from basic protections has never been normal. And the new normal has to be the shift in culture where we value all workers, and a political change where these workers are actually given rights. And I hope that more people will follow California's lead in that regard.
Hear, hear.
Thanks, Monica. Assemblymember Reyes, as an elected official, you've been working on these issues for a long time. Can you tell us about some of the other solutions you're seeing in your community and frankly across the country that are successfully helping to close the wage gap? And can you tell us as well a little bit more about the group that you're part of, Unseen Latinas?
Oh, thank you for asking. I think, I want to tell you how encouraged I am by all the work that's being done in this space. And I want to thank you and the Office of the First Partner. I want to thank the California Commission on the Status of Women and Girls and Time's Up for all the tireless effort. And also Se Puede. I'm so encouraged by that. There's so much that can be done by shedding light on such an important subject. And the organization, the Unseen Initiative, it is, as you've said, this is a new effort led by Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez in partnership with the California Latino Caucus. The Assembly Speaker just put a select committee together. We're so proud of that. The initiative is going to address the opportunity gaps that Hispanic women, Latinas face in engaging us in a variety of industries, from the low-wage workers to corporate-level chief executive officers. We want to identify the issues and we want to find solutions. I also, if I may, I want to highlight Speaker Anthony Rendon. I mean, he's someone who has, during his tenure, has appointed more women to positions of leadership than any of his predecessors. I also, this is a time for thank yous, right? I want to thank the governor and his team because there's been so many bills that have gone to his desk, and he's got to decide which ones are necessary. And he has signed into law some key legislation that will elevate women in the workforce and start to provide some parity in the protection of rights. If I may, I also want to thank all of our advocates. They've been working so hard to improve worker protections, access to health care, availability of childcare, because we know that it's the women who take on the responsibility of childcare, and we've got to provide that for them. And especially during this pandemic, so many things have been, there's like a light that's been shining on these issues in a way that it hadn't been before. The efforts of all of these, I think, are going to have now allowed women to continue working and to provide for their families during this time. And there's so much work that still needs to be done because we do not have parity. We do not. And it's something we all have to work towards. And by having panels such as this, where we're shedding some light on it, we're not going to solve it, but we're shedding light on it and making sure that everybody knows that there is hope. We're just going to continue to work together.
So it is about partnership, isn't it?
Yes.
A few more questions. Monica, you recently co-founded Se Puede, and Jessica, you founded Se Habla Español, USA, sorry. Se Habla USA. Can you both tell us a bit more about these organizations and what you hope to accomplish over the next few years and what solutions your organizations are working towards?
So thank you all for the shout outs to Se Puede. So Se Puede is a new initiative that I co-founded with 9 other Latina leaders, America Ferrera, Eva Longoria, Carmen Perez, who's one of the leaders of the Women's March. And so a group of us came together to create this new lifestyles platform for Latinas. And we essentially said, people often come to Latinas sort of at the last minute, right? They want us to help with a campaign at the last minute, or they want us to, help a political leader with something at the last minute, but so it's always an afterthought. And we said to ourselves, we know what we need. We have what we need. Let's build it. And so that's Se Puede. It's a platform for Latinas, by Latinas, that is aimed at inspiring. It is aimed at providing education for Latinas, and it is also aimed at lifting up the power that Latinas have. We have power, and no one can tell us any different. And we want to make sure that we are celebrating each other and our accomplishments. And so we launched at the end of August, And our goal is to ensure that Latinas have everything that we need to be powerful as whole people. So that means information on finances, information on our health, information on educational resources, but that also means our civic power. So in the last few weeks, we've been really focusing on providing information to Latinas about getting out the vote and how to be engaged civically in other ways, thinking about running for office, thinking about political appointments, all of these things. And so it's been really exciting to see the level of engagement across the country. And, you know, in the next few years, we're just going to keep building on this vision. And, you know, the community really fuels Se Puede. So we're going to keep listening to Latinas about what we need and the kind of content that they want to see. And we're going to, you know, hopefully keep putting it out in partnership with lots of groups around California and throughout the country.
Awesome. Thank you.
I love this. I love it. I love it. I can't wait to see what Se Puede is going to do.
Oh, it's awesome. So cool. So Se Habla USA.
Amazing. You know, look, with Se Habla USA, you know, this platform was launched so that we could celebrate what it is to be a Latino in the United States. And, you know, going back to an earlier point that Monica said is that, you know, we're not monolith, right? And so, you know, whether you are a first generation or a seventh generation, whether you're Span-Dom, English dominant, Latino in this country, that you see yourself reflected, and that you're participating in the pride and culture that you have. And so, you know, what I love about the platform is that, you know, it's user generated more so than anything else, right? And so we just really have our eye on particularly what people want to learn and hear about in the moment, right? And so what it lives as short stories, videos, YouTube, you know, 30-minute specials on linear, radio events, an Instagram account, and it could be as lighthearted as, you know, let's unpack some of the you know, intricacies of what it was growing up when you were you know, young. So it could be lighthearted and fun, where people share their experiences, but then it's also can be very, you know, serious and timely. And so what I've been really proud about the brand in these last 5-6 months is that, you know, we are addressing those issues of, you know, let's honor our frontline workers, right? Let's talk about race, and that the issues that we are struggling with as a nation around racial inequality, that is our issue as Latinos as well, right? And, you know, and what I also love about the Se Habla USA platform is that in a way, it's starting a very important dialogue amongst generations, even in our own Latinidad of, you know, this is what I believe. Why is that different than maybe what my parents believe in, or, you know, an older generation or a younger generation, and start talking about all the things that matter to us as Latinos. Because I think in this example, by us speaking about issues of importance, and in this case, right, the issues facing women and equal pay, I think knowledge is power. And talking about it is just going to unlock more solutions.
Last question, sort of 30-second answer, if you guys don't mind, maybe to wrap it up. But look, I want to be an ally to all of you. There are all these people watching and listening who will be watching and listening, you know, in perpetuity, who want to be allies. There are really important issues at stake for the Latinx community, not just in this upcoming election, but beyond. What are those issues that you feel are the most important that we can all be allies with, you know, to you on? Give me your thoughts. Assemblymember.
I think for me, oftentimes I think of creating this equitable society. It isn't something that we're going to be able to do just by ourselves as Latinas. We have to have our allies like yourself, and we have to support each other in everything that we do, because if we're talking about dismantling inequality, it has to be done together. It has to be done by those who are in a position of entitlement, position of privilege, and those who are struggling to get there. I think that there are so many things that are being done, but it has to be done together. Otherwise, the struggle is going to be that much harder.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. Jessica.
You know, yes, I echo the Assembly members' comments. I will say also, in addition to that, you know, issues of importance, my goodness, there's just so many right now. I mean, they're all so important. It's immigration, it's the separation of families, it's our dreamers, you know, and then when on the other spectrum, it's the equity of, you know, our workforce, it's racial justice, it's the environment, it's student loan debt, right? That weighs our youth down, right? I mean, I think any of those, right? And everyone's allyship on something that you're passionate about, that you can give your energy, is going to help us kind of move those issues forward.
Monica, thank you.
Yes to all of that. And I would add, you know, we need paid leave laws for all workers. And we also need to make sure that we're addressing the issue of sexual harassment, because sexual harassment has such a devastating impact on people's lives. And Latina workers experience sexual harassment at pretty high rates across the industries that we work in. So those are two issues. And then the other is, you know, people can be allies by just talking about the many contributions that we are making as a community. So yes to all the issues, but also, just as we are championing each other, we need our allies to champion the contributions of our community.
Really beautiful point. Great closing point. Thank you all so much for joining us today for this phenomenal conversation. You three inspire me so much. I'm so grateful to you for your words of wisdom and your inspiration. I want to invite everyone listening to learn more about the Commission on the Status of Women and Girls and their incredible work in California by going to women.ca.gov. And obviously, we invite you all to join our Equal Pay CA campaign. Please head to gov.ca.gov and go to the First Partner of California's For All Women page for more information. But I cannot thank you enough, Monica Ramirez, Assemblymember Eloise Reyes, and Jessica Rodriguez. You are leaders. You are inspiring the next generation. You are inspiring all of us. So just keep doing what you're doing. We are by your side, and we look forward to championing all the things that we discussed today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.